Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to those that may be watching on this recorded. Welcome to another National Institute for Congestion Reduction webinar series. My name is Stephanie Lewis. I will be your moderator today. It is my pleasure to introduce our three speakers today. Let me tell you a little bit more about them before I hand the majority of our remaining time together off to each of them. Our first presenter will be Jeff Kramer. He is the program director for the Transportation Planning Policy and Processes Group at the Center for Urban Transportation Research at the University of South Florida. His research primarily focuses on metropolitan and statewide transportation planning, policy planning, and processes, and has published numerous reports, papers, and articles on various aspects of transportation planning. We also have Ms. Tia Boyd. Tia is a research associate, also with the TP3 program. Her research focuses on transportation decision making with an emphasis on multimodal transportation planning, public participation, and the social impacts of transportation. We also have Taylor Deinhardt. She is a research associate, also with the TP3 program at Qatar. Her research focuses on policy, land use, and technology as it relates to transportation, with an emphasis on accessibility, resiliency, and public health considerations in transportation. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Tia. Tia, take it away.
Thank you, Stephanie. All right. So thank you all for being here today. We'd first like to start this presentation by recognizing the National Institute for Congestion Reduction, or NICR, as well as Metroplan Orlando for funding this project. We'll also like to recognize the Central Florida TSMO Working Group for guidance throughout the project, the various agencies that provided information and input during this study, and Christine Williams, who was an instrumental member of the project team. So we'll start with a bit of background information to better understand why this project was needed. In a nutshell, there is significant delay on the interstates in the Central Florida corridor. The delay on this these corridors account for a large portion of delay in the state, and it is expensive. As you can see on the chart in your screen, we have state of Florida user delay costs and vehicle delay hours, as well as in Central Florida. And we can see that vehicle hours delay in Florida is we have 109,680,000. And then in Central Florida, we have about a little over 43 million vehicle hours of delay. So it does account for a large portion of delay in the state. TSMO can effectively address these conditions. But what exactly is TSMO? Transportation systems management and operations include strategies to optimize the operations of existing infrastructure rather than building new infrastructure. So, among the myriad other benefits, these strategies are quicker to implement, they are low cost compared to traditional solutions, and they usually have low environmental impacts compared to capacity building projects. We can think of TSMO as a process where performance is analyzed from a system perspective and solutions are devised to improve the system. These solutions can range from simple, such as a static road sign, or they can be more complex, like developing an app that provides live travel or parking information. And on your screen, you can see just a few examples of TSMO strategies that are possible. With this in mind, the Central Florida Working Group was formed by an MOU to do several things, which include foster collaboration by hosting regular meetings between MPOs in the area, FDOT district offices, and the Expressway Authority, enhance the role of TSMO in addressing a variety of transportation needs, cultivate a TSMO culture to ensure that it is at the top of mind in decision making, and showcase successful TSMO strategies locally and across the nation by inviting agencies with notable practices or success in TSMO to share with their working group members. Therefore, this project explored what it would look like to regionalize and advance TSMO in the planning process, how the working group could do more to accomplish this goal within the framework of a regional TSMO program, and exactly what that framework could look like. And so, with that, I'll pass it along to Taylor to share how we accomplish these goals.
So, to achieve this project goal, we took a hard look at the current state of the practice in terms of regional TSMO programs through a literature review, case examples, and peer interviews. Armed with this information, we could develop a possible framework for a regional TSMO program. First, we conducted a targeted literature and policy review to help inform the development of the framework for a regional TSMO program. Key topics included policy considerations and impediments, best practices for advancing TSMO in the MPO process, and strategies for advancing an MPO-centered TSMO entity across a megaregion. For additional insight into the organizational structures, roles, activities, and success factors of regional transportation entities in the United States, 6 multi-MPO and multi-state collaborations in TSMO were identified for further study. I'll talk a little bit about each of these agencies in the next couple slides. Next, we conducted interviews with knowledgeable representatives from 8 agencies engaged in regional TSMO planning and management activities. These included all of our case study organizations, as well as 2 others, NITEC and Smart North Florida. We talked to 3 consortium of agencies, the Eastern Transportation Coalition, the I-10 Corridor Coalition, the Niagara International Transportation Coalition, or NITEC. So the Eastern Transportation Coalition was formerly the I-95 Corridor Coalition. It's a partnership of 19 state transportation agencies and the District of Columbia Department of Transportation, with 22 associate members and 172 affiliate members. The I-10 Corridor Coalition is comprised of 4 state transportation agencies: California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. NITEC is a coalition of 42 agencies in western New York and southern Ontario and includes 4 international border crossings between Canada and the United States. We also talked to 4 regional agencies that each also act as MPOs. Portland Metro serves the Oregon side of the Portland metropolitan area, covering portions of 3 counties. It serves 24 cities and over 1.6 million people. The Denver Regional Council of Governments serves 2.8 million people in 9 counties and 49 municipalities. The Atlanta Regional Commission serves over 6 million people across 11 counties and 75 municipalities, including the city of Atlanta. And the North Central Texas Council of Governments serves approximately 7.8 million people in north central Texas across 16 counties and 235 political jurisdictions. And then we also talked to a nonprofit organization, Smart North Florida. It began as an outgrowth of the North Florida TPO's Intelligent Transportation System program for Clay, Duval, Nassau, and St. Johns counties, and became a nonprofit and separate entity from North Florida TPO in 2021. So these organizations were selected for interviews based on prior research indicating that the agencies excel in TSMO capabilities and or they exemplify certain success factors in regional collaboration related to TSMO. Interviews covered topics such as funding, staffing, and governance structure. The case studies, interviews, and the literature reviews brought to light several themes and success factors that appeared throughout our research among transportation planning entities working across jurisdictions at the regional and megaregional scale to employ TSMO. Uh, So the first thing that we found was that TSMO planning and budgeting is often limited to specific projects or initiatives based on funding programs. So the budget for TSMO planning tends to be narrow in scope or ad hoc rather than comprehensive in relation to the planning effort. Successful agencies developed critical processes and institutional arrangements that enabled TSMO to be seen as on par with infrastructure and capacity improvements. This can be achieved by establishing priorities that can feed into long range transportation plans and transportation improvement programs, and by developing processes and procedures to ensure more sustainable funding for TSMO activities. The second success factor is about identifying shared priorities. Local and regional planning agencies are concerned with a broad range of issues in their jurisdiction and may not have the bandwidth to add megaregional considerations to their agenda. Several of our case study agencies use visioning and aligning priorities across the region to identify issues that could be addressed at the megaregional level. Aligning long range planning schedules and priorities facilitates data sharing, joint planning activities, and work products. This action also allows MPOs to leverage the megaregional concept to solve problems within their jurisdiction, helps them identify shared legislative and funding opportunities, and provides the ability to respond to federal and state priorities and pursue federal grants. Next, we have identifying a TSMO champion and key stakeholders. Agencies involved in regional TSMO programs participate throughout the program, but the level of involvement may fluctuate for a number of reasons. Success factors to address this issue are to identify a TSMO champion, have a well defined stakeholder or cooperation plan and program, and to obtain buy in from all local agencies that have a project priority list. Success factor number 4 is about building trust. Agencies that oversee geographically diverse, large, populous regions may experience mistrust, which can impede collaboration. Some agencies in the case studies found that an incremental approach through small scale project or issue specific agreements allowed them to formalize their relationship and pave the way for more ambitious joint goals and plans for the emerging megaregion. Another success factor for building trust in large scale planning efforts is a coordinated and transparent approach to identifying, tracking, and reporting project progress and performance. Tracking results demonstrates that benefit of conducting joint projects, provides all partners with consistent information, and helps in demonstrating the long-term benefits of multi-MPO planning efforts. And finally, a common barrier among case studies was lack of institutional authority, governance structure, governance support, or political will. Formalizing structure, roles, and commitments through agreements such as intergovernmental agreements, MOUs, or charters, and forming MPO councils, forums, working groups, and high level steering committees helps to ensure that the institution has management support, is formally recognized by other organizations in the megaregion, and that the institution has defined roles and responsibilities for participants. The scope and level of detail in these arrangements will depend on the size and needs of the MPO. Um, so, with the literature review, case studies, peer interviews, and success factors, we're ready to build our recommended framework for a regional TSMO entity. Jeff is going to cover the framework for you now.
Thanks a lot, Taylor, and thank everybody for attending today. We're going to cover in just a few slides the elements of the recommended framework that we provided in this research report. But bear in mind, I think when you're looking at these elements or when I'm talking about them, that you're going to recognize that they're all flowing from the peer analysis and the literature review and those success factors that Taylor was just talking about. So let's go ahead and talk about each of these elements. The first is to develop a TSMO strategic plan, and we heard with some of the peers is that you need to have a vision for and a common approach, a common vision among the members of the of the entity, the regional TSMO program. And so the approach that's been taken by many of our peers, many of the peers we talked to and discussed in the literature, is to have a strategic plan. And I don't mean just like a TSMO master plan, which some of your agencies may have, but a strategic plan for the agency or the program itself. So in that, you would establish an organizational vision, one that's shared by all the members, and have a mission and some goals. You'd also have some objectives that you would include in there, and you would identify actions that need to be taken in order to achieve the organizational vision, and then setting performance measures. And Taylor was talking about tracking those performance measures and being able to use those to justify and explain to stakeholders and the public at large and other decision makers the purpose of the entity and it's all would be rooted here in the strategic plan. So first important element of the framework. Second is to publish a work plan. For MPOs, this would be similar to your UPWP. It's what are we as an agency going to do over the course of the next year or a couple of years, and it will describe how the work of the program of the regional planning entity would support the priorities identified in the strategic plan. So it's tied to the strategic plan, which contains the vision agreed upon by all the members. It would define the core activities, and it was focused on attainable goals within the time frame of the work plan, and it would set deadlines, and it would maybe most importantly communicate to stakeholders, members, and other interested parties and the public at large how expenditures by the planning entity will be made, and how they tie to the strategic vision as described in the in the strategic plan. And then that you would, as an entity, the next element is to publish an annual review. So where the work plan looks forward and signals to and communicates with the public and stakeholders, what are we going to do over the next few years? The annual review looks backward and says, here's what we did. And here are the accomplishments we had. And you're going to use the performance measures that are identified in the strategic plan to document that performance. So it's a communication tool for demonstrating the impact and the expenditures being made by the TSMO entity. So as you can see, those documents are all well tied together. So you have a strategic plan and the work plan that looks forward and the annual review that looks back, all supporting a strategic vision for the entity. Then we're going to shift and we'll talk about money. This is a conversation every agency has to have, right? And in this case, as Taylor mentioned, we need to be identifying stable and dedicated funding mechanisms, and you want to do that for specific purposes. So, what do we mean by stable? We want the funding for the entity to be both reliable, so that you can count on it and sustain the activities of the program over an indefinite period of time, and then also it be the funding mechanisms be diversified, so that as one might go up or down in its return to the entity, the other one, a diversified um, stream of revenue would stabilize the funding for the entity. And we saw this with the peers. We saw with several, and I'll just pick one, the Eastern Transportation Coalition, relying both on dues from its member agencies, but also on federal grants. You would see with some of the MPOs, they're of course relying on traditional MPO planning funds, but that they're also relying on perhaps dues and also on federal or state or even nonprofit grants to implement their planning activities, so they have both diverse and reliable funding mechanisms. And then they're also communicating and setting aside funding for TSMO projects, in this case, be studies, data acquisition, and a variety of other TSMO related projects that the entity might be undertaking, and also for organizational purposes. If they're paying rent, if they're paying for staff, if they have to, pay for general counsel, if they have to pay for meeting space, and so on. So things related to organizational purposes, just like all other entities, excuse me, all other organizations have to take on. The next element was to provide dedicated staffing. And we saw this both in the literature and also as exemplified by the peers that we talked to, that the element that we're suggested in the framework to employ at least one full-time staff position whose job is dedicated to the TSMO organization itself, and the responsibilities would be core to the organization, managing the organization, preparing updates, the strategic plan updates, the work plan updates, annual reporting, performance measurement, and communication strategies. And really, it's to avoid the pressure of performing two jobs, because in some of the cases with the peers, we were seeing that a person was tasked to attend to the work tasks of the regional planning entity or exercise or program, if you will, but that's on top of the job they're already doing. And so there was a lot of pressure on that person to advance the regional entity's objectives while also getting all of the work done that they're being paid for by their employer. And really, when push comes to shove, which, you know, ask yourself, which would you do? You would probably do the work that you're being paid for first, and then attend to the work of the regional entity. So if you have a dedicated staff person uh, who's dedicated exclusively to the TSMO organization, in this case, you'll find that that is a real success factor for the ongoing um, the ongoing role of that program. The next element of the framework is to establish a clear governance structure and to foster political support. So in many of the cases, we saw interlocal agreements or memorandums of understanding. In the case of the I-10 Corridor Coalition, there was an interstate compact. And so you're producing these formation documents, which then outline the purpose of the organization, the entity, and what everybody's responsibilities are of the members, who's contributing, how are they contributing, what are they contributing, and how often are you meeting, and also what do your boards and your committees look like. So one of the success factors is to have a policy board overseeing the activity of the entity. Uh, one purpose of that is to just be able to provide policy support to the actions of the entity, but also to build political support and ongoing leadership support for the activities of the entity. Because after all, if you these these leaders change over time, but if they're involved in a policy board, regular meetings, regular discussions about the activities of that entity, um, then they would then they there will remain, or you've got a much better chance of maintaining political support for the actions of that entity, and also a technical committee that could support the decision making and support the staff of the entity. And then we talk about, and it came through as a success factor, is identifying TSMO champions. And these don't necessarily have to come from either the policy board or the technical committee, but they could, and in fact would be very helpful if the people who are on your policy board are also TSMO champions, understand the value of TSMO, and can carry that message both back to the member agency, but also to the public and to other stakeholders and leaders that they have contact with. The next element is to develop an education and communication program. So we know the importance of outreach for transportation agencies in general, and that's no different than for a TSMO planning entity that would exist in Central Florida. Now, we already talked about some of the communication and education documents. Producing the strategic plan, the work plan, and the annual review are important elements of communicating to stakeholders, the public, and your members the value of the program, of the entity itself, what the mission is, and how you're going to achieve it and what you've already done for it recently and how you're spending their money wisely. And but it goes beyond that. Educational programs could also be developed by the entity to go out and talk to the business community, neighborhoods, um, other elected officials who are not involved in either the entity's policy board actions or even members of the MPO, but other leaders who we want to express the value of TSMO in general to, and the value that a regional planning TSMO planning entity would bring to that, and then putting all that on a website so that it's available for everybody. And in the case of some of the peers, we also saw that they had dashboards related to TSMO, TSMO activities and related data to delay, to congestion in the area. So maintaining communication strategies through a website was an important element. And then finally, uh, an element of the framework, particularly given the federal government's focus on equity and transportation, was to look at how could a TSMO program, a regional TSMO program, also integrate equity and support issues of transportation equity within the framework. And that could be through the strategic plan, through the goals and objectives and the priority action items listed in the plan. Also within the defining documents as a goal um, of the organizing members in the funding criteria, and then also as you track performance, integrating equity as an element of the tracking and reporting that out in the annual reports. And we saw good examples of that, particularly from Portland, from Metro, the MPO in the Portland, Oregon area, examples of how that might work. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Taylor to describe how we informed the Central Florida TSMO Working Group of the elements of the framework and the peers.
So, once we developed the elements of the framework for a continuing and sustainable regional TSMO planning entity, we held a virtual peer exchange with representatives from our peer programs, the executive directors of all of the MPOs across the corridor, members of the Central Florida TSMO Working Group, as well as representatives from the Federal Highway Administration and DOT. We also had Expressway Authority representatives in attendance. At this peer exchange, we introduced everyone to the elements of the proposed framework and also used this event to provide an opportunity for the Central Florida TSMO Working Group to talk to representatives from the peer programs that we based a lot of the proposed framework on. It also gave the peers an opportunity to comment on the framework itself. So it was a great exchange that lasted the better part of a day. The result of this exchange was a detailed discussion by the MPO executive directors in the corridor, who in the end endorsed developing an organizational strategic plan as the next step in forming a regional planning entity. Which brings us to today, where the development of a regional TSMO organizational strategic plan for the Central Florida region just kicked off last month. The strategic plan will define the vision, goals, and objectives of the regional TSMO program, assess strengths and opportunities in the region, recommend appropriate regional initiatives and actions, and recommend an organizational structure, including staffing, potential funding mechanisms, and board structure. Our team is currently working on the strategic plan with Kimley Horn, and we'll be excited to share it with everyone once it's complete.
So thank you all for your time and your attention. We once again like to thank NICR, Metropolitan Orlando, the Central Florida TSMO Working Group, and all of the agencies that participated in the interviews and peer exchange. I'll pass it to Stephanie so that we can answer any questions that you may have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jeff, Taylor, and Tia, for all the wonderful information. I would just quickly like to remind everybody that you can use that Q&A box, which is located in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Type in any questions and/or comments you have. and we'll read those out loud and get our presenters today to respond to your questions. It does look like we have a number of questions already submitted, so we'll get kind of get through those. How would a group get started if they want to form a regional TSMO program?
Well, I'll go ahead and take a crack at that first. And I think that what happened here in the Central Florida uh, corridor is is that each of the individual MPOs and stakeholders were kind of working in their own little silo related to their TSMO planning efforts, and ultimately decided to form the regional TSMO working group, and to start to share their experiences, their frustrations, their successes, and ideas. And I think that was, I think that's how anybody could get started, and that's not exclusive to TSMO. Really, on any larger multi-jurisdictional planning approach, you could start with a shared interest and information exchange, and then as that goes, you could start to venture into, well, what more can we do? And that's really where we are right now in creating a strategic plan for a regional TSMO program that'll put a little more meat on the bones, try to take into account some of the elements of the framework that we described in today's presentation. And that's really where you need to get started. And I would also add that this is a place where maybe there's a TSMO champion, somebody who really wants to be pushing this, and that might come from the staff level. In the end, you're going to need leadership support for entity or program like this to survive. But it can be kind of think of somebody kind of blowing on the little flame and trying to get it to grow bigger by feeding it. That could be at almost any level, and that's really how I think an area can get started. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, Jeff, I think this next question sort of is a good follow up to what you just sort of spoke about. Do you think there is a minimum size or population to support an effort like this? Um, this person suggests that the area is maybe too small where they're currently located.
All right, I'll go ahead and answer that one too. But Tia or Taylor, you're welcome to pipe in on this if you want to. I really don't think any place is too small. Um, it might feel that way, and you might feel on an island, but depending on how you define your region, um, and draw the lines, you could certainly be sharing across those lines. And I think there could be a lot of benefits to particularly someplace that you feel small. Uh, but if you're drawing the boundary of the regional entity, you could do a lot of sharing and of both of information, but maybe also data. And one of the ideas behind the potential for a regional TSMO uh, planning entity, and I want to emphasize planning, right? We're not getting involved in implementation. Let the implementing agencies be involved in the exclusively in the implementation. But there's a lot of research that can be done, a lot of data sharing that could happen, and forming maybe common data structures, common data elements, maybe banding together and purchasing data collectively as a group, and would make it make data available to you that you wouldn't have access to as a smaller area. So it's really in the benefit is in, and the power is in collective approach, and kind of working through issues together, maybe also learning from each other's mistakes so that collectively you can work on things, and avoid some of the pitfalls that your neighbors may have had. So I wouldn't I would really encourage you not to think of yourself as too small, rather draw your boundaries big.
Great, thank you. Someone asked the question. Yes, this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be posted on the NICR website, the same link where the registration is. So it'll be posted right on that NICR website. The next question comes in. It says, "How are these programs funded?"
I could take a crack at that one. Um, so it's very dependent on the entity. And so when we were looking at the different case studies and seeing how they funded their different programs, there was kind of a wide degree of differences. Some of them had member dues. Some of them, like for instance, the I-10 coalition, if any one of the members got a grant for a joint regional project that they all, wanted to have completed, the member states would contribute funds to that project to get it completed along with the grant. There's of course competitive grants, especially one of the reasons that it's a good idea to have one of these regional entities is that you can kind of compete for these regional grants that you need a regional project for. Some of them, actually, most of them had dedicated funds that they used. So Oregon Metro, for instance, or I'm sorry, Portland Metro has CMAC and STBG and TA funds that were all going towards TSMO projects. Um, NITEC was an interesting example because they are funded through the New York DOT, but then they have a revolving loan fund program in which they loan funds out and then they accrue interest, and then they use the interest that they accrue from those revolving loan funds to complete TSMO projects. So kind of up to your imagination and what you can come up with to fund these type of programs. But I think that the most important thing is what Jeff talked about is no matter what you do, to have something dedicated and then to have something kind of multiple options so that you don't have to worry about one pot of money drying up.
Great, thank you. How does the Portland Metro Regional TSMO plan support equity in terms of objectives and activities? Or can you give general examples?
I can take that one. So they developed a equity decision tree that looked at equity in the TISMO program at three levels, so at plans, strategies, and actions. So, for example, in the plans, it identified who's making the decisions. At the strategies level, it addressed things like, are there barriers to being involved in the TISMO decision making process? And then at the actions level, it identifies things like who needs to be changed to remove a burden if one is identified as being as existing. So they try to take a tiered and level approach. Basically, the tree represents like from a ground up approach at integrating equity into their TISMO program.
Great, thank you. How would our TTSMO planning equity program differ from a TISMO working group?
So I'll go ahead and take that one. Um, I think you kind of view it on a continuum, if you will, and the TSMO working group that exists in Central Florida has done a terrific job for the members, all these 8 MPOs plus the expressway authorities and the DOT, um, to share information with each other and to talk about experiences, and approaches that they've each taken, to support TISMO implementation through their planning processes, and fund TISMO projects and educate folks about TISMO. Again, the goal being that TSMO should be kind of normalized as among the very first options you think about for addressing delay and congestion at a multimodal level. The the regional TSMO planning entity would take that a step further, formalizing the process. And depending on, we haven't done it yet, right? But we're seeing in the examples in the peers that doing perhaps studies that have mutual benefit across for all of the members, taking an educational approach that all the members can benefit from, so that each MPO or each entity who's a member doesn't have to develop their own educational materials, but rather they can be developed jointly under a common umbrella. And then elements like data sharing and data, all the elements of making data available to each other and across the entire region, so that they're in this common format, that everybody's using the same terms, and maybe even creating the purchasing power, so that data could be purchased as a regional entity that any one of the individual organizations might not be able to afford by themselves. So, we know that's true in areas like insurance and a variety of other areas um, where a consortium can be pulled together to get discounts on the purchase of whatever the consumable good is. And that would be true, I think, of data that would be useful in the TSMO realm. And that's just a few things that I'm thinking of off the top. So it ups the game of moving from a working group to a more formalized planning entity with policies, procedures, a strategic plan, and staff.
Wonderful. Another question says, how can similar groups make sure that the program lasts and continues to be effective?
I think that our framework that we created was kind of specifically made for that function. So that if you follow each of the steps of the framework, um, that's the goal is to have something that lasts and continues to be effective. But the specific kind of two steps in that framework that I think that most addresses this is the establishing a clear governance structure portion of it, and the dedicated staff. One of the things that we heard from our peer interviews was that if you had one person who maybe wasn't necessarily um, had a dedicated position to TSMO, but they just were very passionate about it. Once that person, inevitably left the agency, anything related to furthering TSMO kind of fizzles out. And then on the other side of that is the governance structure, is that people come and go. Um, executive directors, people on the board, they come and go, and they might have different ideas, political agendas, and what have you. So having that formalized written structure with the roles and commitments kind of helps to protect the agency against kind of that changing of people, because you have a kind of set written idea of exactly what you want your entity to do when it comes to TSMO.
Wonderful. It looks like we have one final question that has multiple parts. It says, you mentioned identifying a TSMO champion as part of the framework, which makes an effective TSMO. What makes an effective TSMO champion, and how can agencies foster uh, these uh, these people's interest in TSMO?
All right, I'll take that one. Um, so that's a hard question, and it can be answered in many different ways. But I think identifying a TSMO champion is going to be the role of the members themselves, and it's either the member agencies of the entity, that is, to identify either a policymaker or a leader, or even a technical person who has who really shows the interest, but it would be most important at the policy level. Either an agency director or an elected official or somebody sitting on the policy board who has the authority to make decisions, right? And in order to kind of foster it is the role, I think, of the people involved in the agency to identify at the very earliest phases somebody who shows the interest and to then encourage that interest through education or training. And I don't mean to train an elected official to be a staff person, but take them along to a conference and expose them to the ideas that are being and the discussions that are being held around the country. Excite them about the opportunity to be involved in this, and then elevate their role so that they can take on the mantle of champion, if you will. They may or may not even realize they're doing it. But I think it's the way an MPO director identifies a new person on their board who they think, oh, that could be my chair one day, and I want to encourage that through discussion and through training and through exposure. And I don't think that this is any different. You do need the leadership of the member agencies to stay supportive. You need somebody who has the ability to talk to those other people, other leaders, and to kind of stay focused and stay energized about the benefits of TSMO until we reach the point that TSMO strategies are thought of first when our transportation systems are experiencing delay and congestion, and trying to steer away the very obvious mistakes, I think, in my own opinion, of thinking, oh, there's some traffic out here, oh, there's too many cars, too many people, I need to widen this. Let's get, let's remember that the goal of this entity is to look at these strategic and generally lower cost investments, and to find somebody who gets it and wants to carry that banner. I hope that answers that question.
Wonderful. Thank you. It doesn't look like we have any additional questions, so I'm going to give everybody back about 9 minutes of their day, and open up the evaluation on your end. If you could each take a few moments to complete that evaluation, as the feedback provided is not only important to the NICR webcast series, but the presenters today. We do have a full schedule coming up. But please stay connected to the NICR website at nicr.usf.edu to stay connected, and to be notified of when all of our upcoming webinars are occurring. Again, on behalf of the staff at the National Institute for Congestion Reduction, thank you so much for attending today's webinar, and we'll see you all real soon. Bye, everybody.